when a third-generation guitar maker from Kentucky furiously declared on a podcast that President Trump's tariffs were destroying her family's legacy. She never expected her anger would reach Robert Downey Jr., leading to a showdown over the true meaning of Made in America. The audio clip, lifted from a niche podcast called The Luthier's Workbench, started as a ripple in a very small pond. It was shared first among fellow woodworkers and musicians, people who understood the difference between Sitka spruce and Adirondack red spruce. Within hours, the ripple became a wave. Her raw, unpolished anger was potent. It wasn't the calculated outrage of a pundit. It was the desperate cry of a master craftswoman watching her life's work turn to dust. The clip jumped from musician forums to political blogs. Then it hit Twitter. Commentators, journalists, and everyday citizens began dissecting her words. A 3-minute passionate rant that was now a national talking point. In newsrooms across the country, producers scrambled to find out everything they could about the woman whose voice was suddenly everywhere. Eliza Vance of Vance Guitars. A week before her voice would echo across the nation, Eliza Vance sat in the silence of her workshop, the air thick with the sweet, sharp scent of sawdust and lacquer. The only sound was the crinkling of a letter in her hand. It was a final notice from her supplier of Brazilian rosewood, a material essential for the backs and sides of her highest-end acoustic models, the ones that carried the soul of her family's name. The notice informed her that, due to the new blanket tariffs on imported timber, the cost of her next shipment would increase by 200%. It wasn't a negotiation, it was an obituary for her business. She could see her grandfather, Silas Vance, at the workbench in the corner, his glasses perched on his nose, showing her how to feel the tension of a truss rod. She could smell the coffee her father, Beau, brewed every morning before he started carving necks. They had survived recessions, floods, and changing musical tastes. They had never faced this. Her business wasn't a factory. It was a legacy held in two hands. She made fewer than 50 guitars a year, and each one was a masterpiece of resonance and tone, sought after by discerning musicians who paid a premium for perfection. Now, a government policy designed to protect American industry was strangling one of the most American businesses she could imagine. The frustration simmered, then boiled. It was a deep, personal anger, the kind that comes when your identity is threatened. That evening, her old friend, a hobbyist podcaster named Marcus, called for their weekly chat. He heard the despair in her voice and said, "Liza, you should talk about this on the show. People need to hear it." She refused at first. She was a guitar maker, not a politician, and as she looked at the silent, half-finished instruments in her shop, she felt she had no other choice. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Washington, D.C., President Donald Trump was in his element. Standing at a podium before a cheering crowd at a rally, he celebrated the very policies that were suffocating Eliza Vance. "We're putting America first again," he boomed, his voice resonating through the arena. "For decades, other countries have been laughing at us, taking advantage of us with bad trade deals. We're stopping it. We're putting massive tariffs on their goods, and our great American companies are going to thrive like never before." The crowd roared its approval. To them, this was a display of strength, a necessary correction. The idea of a small luthier in Kentucky being crushed by these grand geopolitical maneuvers was an abstraction, an unfortunate but acceptable casualty in a larger economic war. The president saw the world from 30,000 feet, a grand map of nations and industries. The fine-grained detail, the individual lives impacted by the sweep of his pen, was lost in the noise of his own certainty. His days were filled with meetings on global strategy and rallies that reinforced his worldview. The thought that his America First policy could be dismantling the legacy of a family that had been building American products since the 1950s would have seemed like a contradiction, an impossibility. In his quiet home studio in Malibu, Robert Downey Jr. was doing what he often did late at night, exploring rabbit holes. He wasn't scrolling through celebrity gossip or political outrage feeds. His interests were more eclectic. He was fascinated by craftsmanship, by the intersection of art and technology. One of his current passions was the science of acoustics, leading him down a path of vintage microphone schematics and, eventually, to the websites of bespoke instrument makers. He admired people who dedicated their lives to a single, tangible skill. He saw a parallel between their obsessive pursuit of perfection and the way an actor builds a character, piece by piece. His algorithm, tuned to his unique interests, had started feeding him content from the world of luthiery. He'd watch videos of wood being bent, of intricate inlays being set into fretboards. It was a world away from Hollywood, a world of patience and precision. He felt a deep respect for it. He wasn't looking for a cause or a fight. He was simply feeding his curiosity, unaware that this niche interest was about to pull him into a very public and very personal confrontation. The podcast episode, titled The Price of Tone, began like any other. Marcus, the host, had a soothing voice, and he and Eliza usually talked about bracing patterns and the pros and cons of different finish types. But this time was different. After a few minutes of small talk, Marcus asked, "Liza, you sound like you've got a lot on your mind. What's going on down at the shop?" Eliza Vance took a deep breath, and the frustration she'd been holding back for weeks came pouring out. "What's going on, Marcus? I'll tell you what's going on. I'm being put out of business. By my own government." Her voice, usually calm and measured, was tight with anger. "I have a letter on my desk that basically triples the cost of the rosewood I need. I'm supposed to be the kind of business this administration says it's protecting. We're a family business. 3 generations. We don't outsource anything. My father's hands and my hands, that's our factory. We build American guitars, and we're being treated like we're the enemy." She went on, her voice cracking with emotion. "They talk about made in America. Well, what does that even mean if the people who are actually making things in America can't afford the materials to do it? This isn't some giant corporation playing games with supply chains. This is my life. This is my grandfather's legacy. He taught me how to listen to the wood, to hear the music inside it before you even cut it. And now I'm getting letters telling me that wood is part of a trade war? It's absurd. I feel like I'm screaming into a void. Does anyone in Washington know what they're actually doing to people like us?" The rant lasted for just under 3 minutes. It was raw, unplanned, and devastatingly authentic. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Marcus, a little stunned, just said, "Wow, Liza, I hear you." The episode went live on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, Acoustic Artisan Monthly, a respected online trade magazine, had picked it up. They embedded the audio clip in a feature article titled, "An American Luthier's Cry of Rage. Are Tariffs Killing Craftsmanship?" The article laid out the specifics, explaining the complexities of the timber trade, and how the new tariffs were disproportionately affecting small, independent builders who relied on specialty imported woods that had no domestic equivalent. The piece was balanced and well-researched, but the star of the show was Eliza's voice. The comments section of the article became the real battlefield. At first, it was filled with fellow luthiers and musicians sharing similar stories. "She's right," one wrote. "My costs for German spruce are through the roof." Another added, "This is what happens when people who have never made anything with their hands make policy." But as the article spread, a different kind of commenter arrived. The tone shifted. "If you can't afford it, find a different wood. Use American cherry," one person posted, missing the point about the specific tonal qualities required for high-end instruments. The political attacks began soon after. "She's probably just another liberal trying to make the president look bad," another comment read. "Sore loser." The fight descended into a vicious back and forth. Her supporters defended the art and the craft. Her detractors saw only politics. Eliza Vance, who had never so much as written a letter to the editor, found herself at the center of a raging ideological war. She was no longer a person. She was a symbol. To one side, she was a folk hero, the authentic voice of the forgotten artisan. To the other, she was a political pawn, a whiner who couldn't adapt. She sat at her kitchen table, watching the comments pile up, her heart sinking with each new insult. She had wanted to be heard, but she never wanted this. This wasn't a discussion. It was a digital mob. The firestorm reached its peak on Thursday night. The story had been picked up by several major news outlets, and Eliza Vance was trending on social media. It was late, just after 11 p.m., when the notification that everyone had been half expecting, half dreading, finally landed. President Donald Trump, likely scrolling through his feed before bed, had seen the story. He responded with a tweet. It was brief, dismissive, and utterly devastating. I see some people are complaining about the strong tariffs we need to make America rich again. I've heard about this guitar maker. Sad. If your business can't handle it, it means you're weak, and we're never going to survive anyway. We only want strong American companies. The weak ones will fail. That. The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. Weak. He had called her weak. Her grandfather, who had worked until his hands were knotted with arthritis. Her father, who had poured his entire life into the shop. Her own 16-hour days, the calluses on her fingers, the constant striving for perfection. All of it, dismissed in a single tweet as weak. The digital mob now had its marching orders from the highest office in the land. Her phone, which had been buzzing with messages from reporters and supporters, began to explode with a new kind of message, filled with vitriol and threats. The void she thought she was screaming into had screamed back, and its voice was a roar. The tweet landed at 11:07 p.m. By 11:15 p.m., the landline in Eliza Vance's kitchen, a rotary phone she kept for its nostalgic charm, began to ring. She picked it up, expecting a concerned neighbor. The voice on the other end was distorted, seething with a venom that felt unreal. "You think you're so special? You weak little," the voice spat, followed by a string of slurs so violent it made her drop the receiver as if it were burning hot. It clattered against the wall, the distorted voice still squawking from the dangling earpiece. She stared at it, her body trembling. Before she could process it, her cell phone lit up with a blocked number. Then another, and another. Her email inbox, which she foolishly opened, was a tidal wave of hatred. Hundreds of messages flooded in, many simply containing the word weak in the subject line. Others were more graphic, filled with threats against her, her family, and her business. They called her a traitor, a liar, an enemy of the people. The digital mob, given its signal, had become a real one, and they knew where she lived. She stumbled into the living room and sank onto the couch, pulling a handmade quilt over her head as if it could block out the world. The workshop, her sanctuary, now felt like a target. Every shadow in the yard seemed menacing. The sound of a car passing on the road outside made her jump. This wasn't a debate about economics anymore. It was a violation. They had taken her voice, her story, and twisted it into something ugly, and now they were using it as a weapon against her. She felt a profound, soul-crushing despair. She had lost. The President of the United States had pointed his finger at her from his digital throne, and his legions had answered the call. Her legacy, her family's name, was now just another casualty in a culture war she wanted no part of. The next morning, her father, Beau, let himself in through the back door, his face etched with worry. He was holding his phone. He was a man of few words. His hands, thick and calloused from a lifetime of woodworking, usually did his talking. But now, his eyes were full of a pain she had never seen before. He set a thermos of coffee on the table and sat down opposite her. He didn't have to say anything. She knew he had seen the tweet and the storm that followed. "I unplugged the shop phone," he said, his voice raspy. "It hasn't stopped ringing." Eliza couldn't meet his gaze. She just stared at the swirling grain of the oak table her grandfather had built. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, her voice hoarse from a sleepless night. "I'm so sorry. I never should have. I should have just kept my mouth shut." Beau reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. It was warm and rough, a map of their shared history. "It's not your fault, Liza girl," he said softly. "You spoke the truth. It's just, the world's gone crazy." He sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "Your grandfather, he believed in two things, God and good wood. He always said, 'Let the work speak for itself.' Maybe we should have just done that. This fight, it's too big for us." The words, meant to comfort, felt like a confirmation of her failure. He was right. She had tried to speak, and in doing so, had invited a monster into their lives. She had endangered her father, sullied their name, and for what? The tariffs were still in place. The letter from the supplier was still on her desk. Nothing had changed, except now she was afraid. "Maybe we should just close up for a while," Beau suggested. "Let this blow over." Eliza nodded numbly. The fight was gone. The president had called her weak, and at that moment she had never felt weaker. Thousands of miles away, the California sun streamed into Robert Downey Jr.'s home office. He woke up not to an alarm, but to the quiet hum of his own curiosity. As he sipped his morning coffee, he scrolled through a news aggregator on his tablet, his eyes scanning headlines about tech, art, and finance. Then he saw it. A cluster of stories around a single name, Eliza Vance. He saw the president's tweet first, bold and inflammatory. Then he saw the headline from Acoustic Artisan Monthly. Intrigued, he clicked. He read the article, his expression growing more focused. He then found the podcast, The Luthier's Workbench, and listened to the 3-minute clip of Eliza's voice. He didn't hear a political operative. He heard a master of a craft, a woman who spoke about wood with the same passion a painter speaks about color. He heard the frustration of an artist whose tools were being broken by forces beyond her control. Then he made the mistake of looking at the comments. He saw the wave of support, quickly drowned out by a tsunami of hate following the president's tweet. He saw the accusations, the dismissals, the sheer cruelty. He saw her entire identity being reduced to a political caricature. He clicked back to the president's message. Weak. The word hung in the air. Downey. A man whose own life was a public testament to the battle against weakness, felt a spark of something he recognized. Protective anger. He knew what it was like to be at the bottom, to be written off. And he knew the immense, unseen strength it took to build something, whether it was a career or a guitar. He saw a profound injustice. A craftswoman pours her soul into creating a uniquely American product, speaks a simple, undeniable truth about her struggle, and for that, the most powerful man in the world publicly shames her and declares her weak. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the Pacific. This wasn't about right versus left. It was about right versus wrong. It was about punching down. And Robert Downey Jr. had a long-standing aversion to bullies. He walked back to his desk, his mind made up. He wasn't going to issue a press release or fire off an angry tweet. That was their game. He was going to play a different one. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. "I need you to get me a number," he said, his voice calm and deliberate. "It's for a guitar shop in Kentucky, Vance Guitars." Before he could make the call, however, the narrative shifted from an unexpected corner. Garrick Gator Monroe was a country music legend with a voice like aged whiskey and a catalog of songs about trucks, heartbreak, and American pride. He was an icon, especially among conservative and rural audiences. He was a known Trump supporter, having played at an inaugural ball, and his patriotism was unimpeachable. He was also famously private and almost entirely apolitical in his public life, preferring to let his music do the talking. And for 35 years his music had been made on a Vance guitar. It was a 1989 model, a dreadnought with a Sitka spruce top that had aged to a honey gold. It was covered in dings and scratches, each one a memory from a different stage, a different city. He had seen the story about Eliza Vance. He'd known her father, Beau, for decades, and remembered Eliza as a little girl with sawdust in her hair, watching him work. He didn't care about the politics of tariffs, but he cared about the Vances. On Friday afternoon, as the attacks on Eliza were at their peak, Gator Monroe posted a photo on his Instagram. It wasn't a selfie or a stage shot. It was a simple, beautifully lit close-up of his old Vance guitar, resting on a stand. The caption was short and written from the heart. Spirit. This old friend was built by Beau Vance in 1989. It's been on every album and every stage with me for over 30 years. It's made of wood, steel, and a whole lot of character. There is nothing weak about it. There is nothing weak about the family that builds them. Some things are more important than politics. Craftsmanship is one of them. #Vance Guitars. The effect was instantaneous and seismic. The post exploded. Within an hour, it had over 1 million likes. His fans, many of whom were also Trump supporters, flooded the comments. Amen, Gator. That's right, real American quality. I stand with Vance Guitars and Gator Monroe. He hadn't attacked the president. He had sidestepped the political brawl entirely and reframed the issue as one of respect for American craftsmanship, a value his audience held sacred. He gave them permission to support Eliza without being disloyal to their political tribe. The hashtag Vance Guitars, which had been a war zone, was now filled with pictures of people's own instruments, with stories of family heirlooms and respect for people who build things with their hands. News outlets immediately picked up the new angle. Country superstar Gator Monroe defends besieged luthier. The narrative was no longer a simple story of a liberal artisan versus a Republican president. It was now far more complicated and far more interesting. Gator's simple act of loyalty had given Eliza a shield. In Malibu, Robert Downey Jr. saw Gator's post. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well played, cowboy," he murmured to himself. The country star had changed the battlefield. He had neutralized the political toxicity and elevated the conversation. Now, Downey's intervention wouldn't be seen as a partisan attack. It would be seen as one artist joining another to support a third. The timing was perfect. He had the phone number on his screen. He took a deep breath, pressed the call button, and lifted the phone to his ear. Back in Kentucky, Eliza was sitting with her father in the quiet workshop, the silence a welcome relief after 2 days of hell. The old rotary phone on the wall, which Beau had plugged back in, suddenly chirped to life. They both tensed, expecting another wave of hate. Beau reached over to unplug it again, but Eliza stopped him. "Just let it ring," she said, her voice weary. But it kept ringing, insistent. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, she stood up, walked over, and picked it up. "Hello?" she said, her voice flat, braced for an attack. There was a pause on the other end, and then a voice, impossibly familiar, spoke. "Hello, is this Eliza Vance?" it asked. "My name is Robert Downey Jr." Eliza froze, her mind unable to process the words. She thought it was a prank, another cruel joke from the mob. "Yeah, right," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I'm the Queen of England." "Who is this, really?" There was a soft chuckle from the other end. "I get that a lot, actually." "Well, not the Queen of England part. Look, I know this is out of the blue. I saw your story. I heard what you said on that podcast. And I just wanted to say, you're not weak. You're the furthest thing from it." About him. Eliza stood frozen, the phone pressed hard against her ear. Beau watched her, his expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. "Who is it?" he mouthed silently. She held up a finger, shaking her head, trying to make sense of the situation. The voice on the other end was calm, patient, and undeniably famous. It was a voice she'd heard in movie theaters her entire life. "I can prove it," the voice said, a hint of amusement in it. "On the podcast you talked about your grandfather teaching you to tap a block of spruce to hear its potential. You said good wood doesn't just ring, it sings in your bones. You can't get that from a news article." I've been looking at your work online all morning. The inlay on your Appalachian Star model, it's breathtaking. You're not a business owner, Miss Vance. You're a master artist." The specificity of his words broke through her disbelief. This wasn't a prank. It was real. Robert Downey Jr. had seen her work. He had listened to her. A wave of emotion, so powerful it buckled her knees, washed over her. It wasn't just relief. It was validation to her. After days of being called weak and worthless by strangers, a man who represented the pinnacle of his own craft was calling her an artist. Tears welled in her eyes as she sank into the chair by the phone. "Mr. Downey," she began, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know what to say." "Parrot." "Call me Robert," he said warmly. "And you don't have to say anything. I called you for a reason. I'm not a politician, and I'm not trying to get into a mud wrestling match with the president. But I am a storyteller, and I believe in protecting our storytellers, whether they use a camera or a chisel. So here's the deal. I'm working on a film where my character is a reclusive, genius musician. He needs a guitar with a soul, a guitar with a story. I want you to build it for me." Eliza was speechless. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend the offer. That's an incredible honor, but with these tariffs, the materials alone." He cut her off gently. That's just a production cost. We'll handle it. I want to commission one of your best. A Brazilian rosewood model. I'll pay you triple your usual price. Don't think of it as charity. Think of it as an advance to cover the absurd cost of your materials, a fee for the rush job, and most importantly, a fee for the story. Because your story, Liza, is now part of the guitar story, and that's exactly what my character needs. He was giving her more than just money. He was giving her a way out that preserved her dignity completely. He wasn't saving a victim. He was commissioning an artist. He was restoring her purpose. "Okay, Robert," she said, a new strength flowing into her voice. She stood up straighter. "Okay, I'll do it. I will build you the best guitar this workshop has ever produced." Bo, watching her transformation from across the room, broke into a wide, tearful grin. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. A wire transfer appeared in the Vance Guitars business account for an amount so large it made Eliza laugh out loud. The threatening calls dwindled, replaced by interview requests, which she politely declined on the advice of RDJ's team. They had a different plan. Instead of a contentious news interview, they arranged an exclusive profile with Vanity Fair. The magazine sent a world-class photographer and a writer who specialized in long-form profiles. For 2 days, the workshop was transformed. The photographer, a woman named Helene, captured the space not as a backdrop for a political story, but as a sacred space of creation. She took pictures of Eliza's calloused hands holding a chisel, of Bo's smiling face reflected in a polished guitar body, of sunlight streaming through the old windows, illuminating clouds of fine sawdust like gold dust. The finished article was a masterpiece of storytelling. Titled "Iron and Wood, Robert Downey Jr. and the Luthier Who Wouldn't Break," it ran online and in print. It featured Helene's stunning photographs, alongside a narrative that focused on the family's 3-generation legacy, their passion for the craft, and the sudden, brutal collision with politics. The president's tweet was mentioned, but it was framed as a catalyst, not the main event. The main event was the art. The climax of the piece was a quote from Robert Downey Jr., who had been interviewed separately. He was asked why he felt the need to step in. His answer became the defining statement of the entire affair. "Look," he said, "this isn't about policy for me. It's about recognizing value. When someone dedicates their life to creating something beautiful and true with their own 2 hands, that's not just a business. It's a contribution to our culture. It's a piece of the American soul. This is American artistry. It deserves protection, not punishment." The line was perfect. It was elegant, powerful, and irrefutable. It wasn't an attack. It was a declaration of principle. The story, combined with Gator Monroe's earlier defense, completely reset the public conversation. Eliza Vance was no longer a political symbol. She was a national treasure, a celebrated artisan who had weathered a storm and was now back at her workbench, building a guitar for Iron Man himself. The narrative of weakness had been utterly defeated by a story of strength, resilience, and artistry. 3 weeks later, in a dusty workshop outside Austin, Texas, a saddle maker named Mateo Garcia wiped sweat from his brow. For months, he'd been staring at a pile of invoices for Argentine leather, the prices climbing higher and higher due to the same tariffs that had nearly ruined Eliza Vance. He was 58 years old, his back ached constantly, and he was tired of fighting. He'd told his wife that morning that he was thinking of finally closing the shop, selling off his tools, and trying to find work at a big-box hardware store. His life's work, making custom saddles prized by ranchers and rodeo riders, felt impossible to sustain. During his lunch break, he sat on an old stool, scrolling through the news on his phone. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to distract himself. Then he saw a link to the Vanity Fair article. He read the whole thing, slowly. He saw the pictures of Eliza's workshop, which looked so much like his own. The organized chaos of tools, the smell of raw materials, the sense of history. He read Robert Downey Jr.'s words and felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He wasn't naive. He knew no movie star was going to call him. That wasn't the point. The point was that Eliza Vance, a woman just like him, had been pushed to the brink and had refused to break. She had spoken up. She had told her truth. She had reminded the world that their work mattered. Mateo closed the article and stood up. He walked over to the wall where his old, cracked leather apron hung. He took it down, tied it around his waist, and picked up a piece of smooth, uncut leather. He thought for a moment, then put it down and picked up his phone instead. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number for a silversmith in San Antonio who made the best buckles he'd ever seen. Then he found the number for a bootmaker in Bandera. He called them both. "Hey, it's Mateo," he said into the phone. "Listen, I've got an idea. We're all getting killed by these costs, right? What if we stopped fighting alone? What if we formed a co-op, an alliance? We could buy our materials together, market our stuff together, stand together." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I was reading about that guitar maker up in Kentucky. If she can take on the president, we can sure as hell take on a supplier." The fight had returned to his voice. In a small workshop in Texas, a new story was just beginning. A quiet but lasting echo of a luthier who refused to be called weak. What do you think? Does standing up for your principles, even when it seems hopeless, truly have the power to inspire change in others? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories you won't hear anywhere else.